Hi everyone, and welcome back to English4U. I'm Pat.
And I'm Mike.
And we have been talking a bit about very early space travel in our article for this couple of days. And before countries sent people into space, they sent animals just to see what happened to them.
Yeah, well, I think they've been doing this for a long time. I think the first people to go up in a hot air balloon back in 16th century France was a goat.
A pig and
a chicken.
Yeah.
They were the first people ever going up in a balloon because people didn't want to do it until they knew nothing bad would happen because, of course, they're doing this for the first time. Not only is it far away and you're traveling fast, but with space travel, I mean, they had no idea what would happen to people. So they were sending up dogs and monkeys, frogs, and of course, Laika, the famous dog that the Soviet Union, the former Russia, that sent up back in 1957. So Laika actually was the first living animal to circle the Earth.
Yep, unfortunately she did not survive.
She didn't come back from that.
No, her body burned up because the capsule got too hot, or she died because of the heat, and then her body burned up as they re-entered the atmosphere. But while Laika was in the air, or in space, scientists used special equipment to measure her heart rate, her breathing rate, and her other body reactions.
That's right. And the instruments that they had, the information that they got from the spaceship, showed that Laika's heart was beating very fast, she was breathing very quickly. She was probably scared. She didn't understand what was happening. It was very loud. It was noisy. The spaceship was rocking around. I guess she eventually felt no gravity, even though she was tied down. But this was a very scary experience for this dog, of course.
So these days we think of Laika as a hero, but what happened back then raises questions about how we treat animals and whether we should use them in scientific tests. And that's what we're going to talk about in part 2 of the article.
Reading. The True Story of Laika, the Hero Space Dog. In the early years of space exploration, nobody knew the effects of being weightless. Animals were used as the first test subjects, but scientists planned for them to die. In Laika's case, they wanted to find out how she would die so they could determine the risk to humans. The public in the 1950s were not very concerned about animal rights. Most people didn't think much about the fact that these animals were being sent to painful deaths. Not only that, but their lives came to an end in a state of extreme fear. Laika's suffering began even before she was launched. To prepare her to travel in a tiny capsule, scientists kept her in a small cage for months. She was also placed in a machine that spun her around to make her used to feeling dizzy. She wasn't fed properly either. However, Laika helped humans become astronauts. The information she provided allowed them to go safely into space.
All right, so the article for today talks about, some of the science that they didn't really know back in the old days, or the early days of the space race, or, the exploration of space. It says, in the early years of space exploration, nobody knew the effects of being weightless. They didn't know the effects of a lot of stuff, but of course one of the big differences between being on the Earth and being in space is on the Earth, we have gravity keeping us on the ground. As anyone who's seen anything about, space travel or movies about people being in space, they know that in space you are weightless. There is no gravity. You're floating around all the time. But this is just a fact of space exploration. What is exploration? This noun is basically the noun form of explore. When you're going somewhere, when you're learning about a new thing, when you're discovering things and experiencing or seeing things that no one has ever done before, that is exploration. You can do it physically by traveling to a place that no one has ever gone before, but we also use it when talking about, scientists doing research into areas of the world that we don't know about. Stephen Hawking, even though he was in a wheelchair, was very important in the exploration of physics and things like that. He wasn't actually going to those places, but he was making discoveries. He was learning new things. He was bringing light to things that no one had ever done before.
Yep, and what people wanted to know was what would happen when they were weightless. What were the effects? The effect of something, it's what is produced by either an action or an influence. So something happens. What happens as a result of this? This is the effect. Now make sure you remember effect with an E is the noun, affect with the A is the verb form. It affected me, I was affected. Its effects with the E were this. Here's an example. The students did an experiment to see the effects of air pressure on a balloon. Saw what different air pressure, a lot of it inside will of course burst it, not so much and it won't really lift at all.
So they affected the balloon to study the effects, or what happened after they did something to it. All right, that's what science is about in a very, very big and basic way. Animals were used as the first test subjects, but scientists planned for them to die. All right, this was just part of science and still is in some ways. They use animals because they don't want to kill people if something goes wrong. They have to study things when they don't really know what's going to happen. They have an idea, but things can happen that they don't expect, and if a person is killed doing it, well, that makes people unhappy. All right, here we're using A as B, using something as something, using an animal as a test subject, for example. When we use A as B, we're basically making something serve a particular purpose. It's not always what we plan for it to be, but basically we're using this to do something, or using this as something else.
Yeah, so they basically planned for Laika to die. This was an idea. They didn't really think she would survive. They maybe didn't really want her to survive. But why? We see in the article that in Laika's case, they, the scientists, wanted to find out how she would die so they could determine the risk to humans. So okay, this is what kills people, so this is what we need to protect the next dog or the next person against. So in that sentence, we use the verb determine. To determine something is to find something out. But it's not just to guess or get a general idea. It is to calculate that answer exactly. It is to find out with no doubt what happened. So to determine what killed Laika, they would be finding out exactly why she died. Was it the heat? Was it the lack of air? Did she just get so frightened that her heart stopped beating? What exactly was it that caused her to die? We need to find that out. We need to determine it. Here's another example. This app can help you determine if you are eating a healthy diet. And they wanted to determine exactly what the risks of space travel were.
There you go. A risk is basically a danger, all right? So we could actually often use the word danger to replace the word risk. What are the dangers of space travel? What are the risks of space travel? What are the things that can go wrong? What are the things we should be careful of or worry about? What are the things that could possibly hurt or even kill people? Those are serious risks and dangers. For example, we could say people that do extreme sports, such as snowboarding or mountain biking, always face the risk of serious injury. Yeah, there's always the chance of serious injury, or the danger of serious injury when you do sports like that, or when you go into space.
Yeah. Now, at the end of day 1, we said that when Laika was sent into space and died, we said later this whole process raised questions about the way animals were treated.
Okay.
But it didn't really raise those questions at the time. The article says the public in the 1950s were not very concerned about animal rights. It was, yeah, there were other things going on, and they go, okay, really, what's the life of a dog versus the life of a human, or the knowledge we get? We got plenty of dogs.
Interesting. I think also back then a lot more people lived on farms and in the countryside, and they knew that, you know, animals die sometimes, whereas now today our dogs are pets. We don't want dogs and cats and cute animals like that to die, so it was just a different way of thinking. People put different value on the life of animals back then than they do now. It says most people didn't think much about the fact that these animals were being sent to painful deaths. Remember, this is also what, just more than 10 years after World War II, when a lot of people had died. So, well, one dog dying for space travel, that's not a big deal, people back then thought. It would be different today, but back then they didn't worry about this kind of stuff or about the painful death that Laika might have experienced. Something painful, this adjective just means it's filled with pain. It has a lot of pain involved. It was something that gave you a lot of pain, all right? If you cut your finger, that could be a little bit painful, but if you break your leg, that would be a lot more painful. But you know, when you get one of those little paper cuts and then you get some lemon juice in it, oh, that's really painful. So when we talk about something that's painful, of course, it's on a various scale, right? Breaking your leg is painful, but maybe not as painful as breaking 2 legs or something. But it doesn't mean that breaking 1 leg or having a toothache or cutting your finger is not painful. It just means there was a lot of pain involved with some kind of thing. Here's a good example. Getting kicked by a horse was a painful experience for Leon. It was painful for 2 reasons. It hurt a lot, and also he was told don't walk behind the horse about a minute earlier. He did. He got kicked, so it was painful because he was silly, and also it hurt a lot.
Okay, so yeah, Laika was being sent to a painful death. They basically like, yeah, that's your job, little doggy. You're going up and you're having to suffer. And we see not only that, but their lives, or the lives of these animals sent into space, came to an end in a state of extreme fear. Okay, we used the words extreme and fear both yesterday's extreme. A great amount of fear makes you scared. Here, we use the phrase come to an end. If something comes to an end, it just means it ends. We often use it in the case of lives. If someone's life has come to an end, they are dying. But you could say the meeting has come to an end, you know, the show has come to an end, the game has come to an end. It all depends on the noun, but since the noun here is a life, then to come to an end means to die.
And the state of something, when we talk about the state of something, we're talking about basically how it is, the condition of something or someone. This is something you might be concerned about when you're buying something online that another person owned. Oh, you're selling your old computer? What kind of state is it in? What kind of state is that old cell phone that you want to give me or sell to me? Is it in a good state? Is it in a good condition? Does it look almost new, or is it broken and you know, got dirt all over it and it just looks like it needs to take a bath? That's a bad state. So the state of something is basically how it is, from new to old, from clean to dirty, from good to bad. We're talking about things that could change, and so its state, well, it will depend on what's going on. For example, when he woke up and looked in the mirror, Warren saw that his hair was in a terrible state. It didn't look good. It was sticking up all over the place. But after 10 minutes of combing it and putting some stuff on, or maybe taking a shower, his hair was in a much better state, in a presentable state, in a very handsome state, if I do say so myself.
So pretty sad, really. Laika died in a state of extreme fear. She was really suffering towards the end. It wasn't a peaceful death, a quiet death kind of thing. It was pretty nasty. And what's worse, as we see in the article, Laika's suffering began even before she was launched. Okay, so here we're talking about Laika's suffering. Suffering is any kind of pain. It could be physical pain. You could be suffering because you've got a terrible headache or a toothache. It could be mental pain. You're worried about what's going to happen in the future, or you've lost somebody who's close to you and you feel in a lot of pain. It could be all kinds of different suffering. It could be just because you've got no food and no money to buy food. You could be suffering because of that.
And the idea also is that it kind of goes on for some time.
Yes, it's not just a quick thing that's over. It's a long period.
3 months of ow.
Exactly. So we could say after 3 months of famine, or where there's no food and no crops being grown, there was great suffering in the land because no one had any food, nobody could get any food to sell, so everyone was poor, everyone was hungry, everyone was sick, that kind of thing.
Life was very bad and it wasn't going to end anytime soon.
Yeah, and the same with Laika really, because all this happened before she was even launched.
All right, launch, this verb basically means to send something off on a journey, but we use it for specific kinds of machines or kinds of vehicles. You don't launch an airplane, you take off when you're on the airplane, but rockets we do launch, and boats we also, or ships we also launch, but usually only the first time. Once you build the boat and push it into the water for the first time, you launch the boat. So rockets, I guess we also use launch because they usually, or back in the old days, they would go up only one time. Nowadays, when you have that new kind of space plane, they might use take off or something like that. But launch is kind of that push it out or send it off on a voyage, especially for the first time ever.
Okay, so what happened to Laika before she was sent into space? We see in the article, to prepare her to travel in a tiny capsule. Remember, a capsule is this very small ship, like basically a little metal box. Scientists kept her in a small cage for months. So that's awful.
That is awful, but I guess to get her used to being in that small thing, so that when they sent her up into space, she didn't start biting and chewing and going crazy. She was also placed in a machine that spun her around to make her used to feeling dizzy. All right, so again, this is something that they did because they didn't really know what would happen to people in space. And when you go up in space, all that liquid in your head that tells you what's up and down and left and right, it kind of floats around. So I don't know if they still do it today, but they used to do it with human astronauts too. Spin them around, make them feel real dizzy. When it's a human, you know what's happening. When you're a dog, it's just scary and weird.
So the idea here is that they did this to get Laika used to something, used to this feeling of being dizzy. If somebody is or gets used to something, then it's common for them. We can say be used to or get used to, and then we follow it with a noun or a VING phrase. You can get used to walking a lot. You can be used to staying up late to work on your homework. Or in our article, we said she got used to feeling dizzy. Okay, here's another one. I'm used to getting up early, now I have a child. Now this kind of grammar is different from just the one used to, which doesn't have the be or get in front of it, and is used to talk about things that were true in the past but not now. For example, I used to live in Banqiao. So if you think of the differences, make sure you look, has it got a be or get in front of it? If so, that means this thing is common or it's becoming common, or you're not used to it, it isn't very common for you. And then just used to with no other word in front of it talks about a past habit. So pretty rough, kept in a small cage, spun around in a machine. Any more?
Well, yeah, to add a little bit of insult to injury, to make it even worse for her, after all of these weird science experiments we learn, she wasn't fed properly either. Not sure what that means, but maybe they didn't give her a lot of food or good food. Maybe they were worried about her weight or something like that. We're not sure why, but after all of this science stuff, she wasn't given a nice big bowl of dog food. She was given a small bowl of dog food, or maybe even something worse than that.
Exactly.
That's good.
Obviously, a lot of bad things happened to poor Laika, ending with her death. The article then states, however, Laika helped humans become astronauts. Astronaut is anybody who goes into space or works in space as part of their job on the International Space Station or landing on the moon like Armstrong and Aldrin and so on. If you're up in space, you're pretty much an astronaut.
Although she was Soviet, so it would really be cosmonauts.
Cosmonaut, yes.
That's what they called their astronauts back then. But basically the same thing. And I think today, most people would understand astronaut as being, someone who goes and works and lives and works or travels in space. And we also learned from Laika the information she provided allowed them to go safely into space. And I think that's an important thing. You know, Laika might have been sacrificed, but it stopped a lot of people possibly dying doing the same things that she was doing for the first time. So unfortunate for Laika, definitely, but would it have been better if people had died? Probably not, but still not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, and that whole question about humans doing things or animals being used to test things is part of our For You Chat question, so let's go there right now.
For You Chat.
So here is our chat question. Do you think animals should be used in scientific experiments? Why or why not?
Wow, that is a very difficult question
it's
that
a
people
huge
write
question.
books about and study for their whole lives. We're talking about medical and scientific ethics, basically here. Well, it kind of depends. I mean, if people could die if you don't do the experiments on animals, I guess it's probably better, you know. Would you want to give a new medicine to your grandmother to see if it worked where she could die, or would you rather give it to a rat or a monkey or a dog? That's one of the things. But I guess it depends on what science are we learning. Of course, you know, we know that certain makeup companies or soap companies will do science experiments on animals.
You don't need to.
I don't think that's necessary, but if it's a new COVID vaccine, you know, are we going to give it to a bunch of people without trying it on animals? And would you or someone you love, would you want them to be the first person to try it out? It's a difficult question, but I think the situation, you know, what science are we doing? What do we want to learn? Can we learn this in other ways without using animals? And even if it costs a bit more money, you know, then I think we shouldn't.
Yeah, and of course it can depend on the animal as well.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to get your cute tiny baby puppy and rub like makeup in its eyes to see what happens.
Something like that.
But what about fruit flies? Some of the most important genetic experiments on genes and transferring genes and DNA have been done on very simple fruit flies because they live quickly, they breed fast, and they have very simple DNA that we can use to make very clear experiments. And are we complaining because we're experimenting on fruit flies? I don't think anybody has said, those poor flies, we shouldn't do it. They feel so much pain. So it is all about the situation. I don't think you can say a complete absolute yes or absolute no. You have to consider each situation on its merits. Like Mike said, what are you learning? Is there another way we can do it? And really, what animal is being used? Really, fruit flies are not something we really need to worry too much about.
Well, I smack them with a newspaper.
Exactly, but we've learned a great deal about DNA from doing tests on them.
Absolutely.
So, there we go. So that is the conclusion, really. Always think about each separate case individually. Okay, that's all we got time for. Thanks for watching, everyone. For English for You, I'm Pat.
And I'm Mike.
We'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.
Take care.
The True Story of Laika, the Hero Space Dog. In the early years of space exploration, nobody knew the effects of being weightless. Animals were used as the first test subjects, but scientists planned for them to die. In Laika's case, they wanted to find out how she would die so they could determine the risk to humans. The public in the 1950s were not very concerned about animal rights. Most people didn't think much about the fact that these animals were being sent to painful deaths. Not only that, but their lives came to an end in a state of extreme fear. Laika's suffering began even before she was launched. To prepare her to travel in a tiny capsule, scientists kept her in a small cage for months. She was also placed in a machine that spun her around to make her used to feeling dizzy. She wasn't fed properly either. However, Laika helped humans become astronauts. The information she provided allowed them to go safely into space.
Vocabulary Review.
Effect. Going jogging every morning before school has a positive effect on my mood. Determine. Lily added up all the costs and determined she didn't have enough money for a New York vacation. Risk. Swimming isn't allowed at the beach because sharks create too much risk for swimmers. Painful. Sally's arm felt quite painful after she fell off her bike. State. The house was in a terrible state after the typhoon, and the owner had to make many repairs. Suffering. The doctor promised that the medicine would ease the patient's suffering.
智慧小补帖
Exploration. Launch. Astronaut.
以上节目是由活用空中美语制作。活用空中美语杂志，请洽询全国各大书店。如欲索取试听教材，请来电02-2364-4000 02-2364-4000，或上网查询，网址是 www.english4u.net www.english4u.net